Hey, hello, mental health warriors out there. I hope everybody's doing well today. I'm very excited about the show. I got a Ron Dawson. He's agreed to come on. He's a phenomenal athlete. I follow him on Instagram, and he does great videos out there. And we'll make sure we put that up on that you can see him. But if you'd like to sponsor my podcast, please shoot me an email at clifford.w.bauman@gmail.com. That'll also be up on the screen. And I hope you enjoy the show. Is one of the things I do with the show is being a mental health warrior. Is I always talk about we have to have a lot of tools in our toolbox, and physical exercise and exercise alone is really good tool to help your mental ability and kind of keep you focused. And that's one of the reasons I wanted Ron to come on here, not because he's a world class athlete. He does Ironmans, he does a Boston Marathon. He's going to talk about all that. But just his mental ability, and if you watch his videos on Instagram, and I fully say everybody join him, follow him. He's a motivating factor for me. Some days I don't feel tired or I feel like working out, and then I log on to Ron's Instagram, and I know one day he was just finishing up a leg workout after he ran 9 miles. So I'm like, crap, now I'm gonna have to go run now. So without that, further ado, Ron, I'd like to have you go ahead and introduce yourself and kind of tell us your story, how you got into running, and how you train for the Boston Marathon, your iron meets and things, and kind of just talk about, how you keep yourself mentally, healthy to go and do that when you're doing your long runs and your long training sessions. I don't run marathons. I do 10 milers, but my older brother, he's ran marathons for years. And so it's kind of inspirational. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, and the floor is yours.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. Where do I start? Well, when I was born.
What made you decide to get into running? I mean, was that something you did in high school, or was it?
Well, I've always been an active person. When I was in high school, I raced motorcycles. I raced motocross. Was actually sort of a semi-professional, and then I got married, and all that stopped. But now during high school, I was actually on the swim team, on the diving team. I didn't swim much, but I was on the diving team, and that kept me in shape. And in the racing motorcycles, I was lifting weights. I was running 4 or 5 miles a day, and they always said motocross was the world's most demanding sport, and I believed that for a long time until I got into Ironman. And but actually, when I turned when my son was born, I was about 25, I think, 23, 25, somewhere in there. Everything just kind of stopped. You're taking care of the kids, life goes on, you're getting busy with your career. And really for about 4 or 5, well, probably about 6 years, I didn't do much. And then when I was in my early 30s, got involved in working out again and started running again. And then all of a sudden, the kids are we had 2 kids by that time. I had a son and a daughter. And they started getting into their teen years. And by the time I was in my late 30s, we were taxi cab drivers.
Yeah.
Every day after school and at night. I mean, we didn't do much. Our life revolved around the kids.
Yeah.
And really, for a long time, probably until I was about 48, 49, I was very inactive. Active with the kids, active doing things, but not active athletically. And so the wake-up call for me came when I went to see my doctor. I did a physical. I was 50 years old, and she told me I was 30, 35 pounds overweight, pre-hypertension, pre-diabetic, and 1 foot in the grave, and every day was going to be another foot in the grave.
They can sneak up on you too. I turned 52 this year, so and I just retired out of the military after 34 years in August. So I totally get that when you go to the doctor and they start telling you those numbers and you get a little freaked out by it.
And I guess like any other person, I felt good. I didn't feel like I had any health issues, and I didn't have any health issues. I've always been in fairly good health.
Yeah.
But about 6 months after that, I had a physical for a life insurance policy, and they told me that I was overweight, pre-hypertension, pre-diabetic, and I'm like, wow, and they wanted to rate me and up my premium based on that. And I'm thinking, there's no way. I mean,
Oh yeah.
if I was about 175 pounds at that point. I mean, I'm 5'6". I'm kind of a smaller guy.
Okay.
But, I'm thinking if I lose 35 pounds, I'm going to look like a pencil,
Yeah.
and we laughed about it. And my wife even told me, you're going to look so skinny. You're not going to look healthy.
Yeah.
And I still kind of get that today.
But not to cut you off, but one thing you said, and it's funny. So I go to the doctor, and I'm 5'8" and I weigh 180 pounds. And so it's funny. So I went to the doctor, and she says, if you would have came to me 2 weeks ago, your numbers would have been normal, but they changed the chart, and now I'm just a little bit above normal on some of that. And so it's kind of funny how that happens with the numbers and things. Like you were saying, you're a healthy guy, you look healthy, and if you would have lost 30 pounds, I mean, crap, that's what you would have been down to 140 pounds, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what happened, I'm thinking, well, I need to go to the gym. Okay. And so I joined the gym, started lifting weights, and then I'm thinking, well, I'm probably not going to lose much weight. I probably need to gain some muscle, so I'm going to gain weight. And so I was going in the other direction. And until my wife finally decided she was going to start running. And she was sort of the inspiration for all of this because, I was sitting on the sofa when I got home from work and I wasn't doing much, lifting a few weights, doing a little bit of nothing, watching TV. And she was running around the block and for a few weeks, and this was 8 years ago.
Yeah.
She said, you need to come out and run with me. And finally one day I did. And she was just running around the block. I couldn't run down to the stop sign. I mean, I was completely gassed just trying to run, a couple hundred yards.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of when everything set in because I remembered, my earlier years, I'm 20 years, 25 years earlier, when I could run 4 or 5 miles, I was in great shape. I couldn't even run down to the stop sign now. I'm thinking this is going to have to change. And so I set my goals on running a mile. And believe it or not, it took me about 6 weeks before I could run a mile.
Oh, wow. How old were you then?
I was 51.
51.
By the time. Yep.
And you bring up a good point that, when a lot of people haven't worked out for a while and they start working out, to take it slow, right? I always tell people you can't just jump right into it. I'm a master fitness trainer and I was a personal trainer for a lot of years.
Yep.
You just can't jump into what you were like at your 20. You brought up a great point that, you just took that time to be able to run a mile. And I think sometimes when people haven't worked out for a while and they start working out, they do too much too soon, they get too sore, and then they just stop working out again.
Oh, yeah. What happened was I ran that first mile, and by that point, I'm thinking, well, I can run 2 miles. My goal by that point was to get back up to, 4 or 5 miles a day, just to run. Well, I didn't run my first 5K, and I made a reel about that on Instagram if you want to see it.
I'll go back and look at it.
But I ran my first 5K that summer. It was 4 or 5 months after I started running. Mm-hmm. And I got passed by a 10-year-old girl and
I did see that. I did see that.
70-year-old shirtless man in a cowboy hat.
Yeah.
And I laughed about that, and it was real. And I was pretty discouraged at that point. But what happened? I live in Dallas, Texas, and I decided I'm going to join the Dallas Running Club because the event was put on by the Dallas Running Club.
Okay.
So I joined the Dallas Running Club, and just getting around all those people, they were my age, some older, some younger. Mm-hmm. I decided I'm going to do this, and I'm going to run a 10K. Mm-hmm. And so I started training for that. And I did that. And then, by that time, all these guys were into half marathons. Some of them were into full marathons. Yeah. Some of them were talking about Boston. And something about Boston just sort of resonated with me. This was before I'd ever even ran a half marathon. Because I'd already, I'm thinking back in my early years when I, raced in the Astrodome in Houston a bunch of times. And motorcycles. And, I've always been sort of that guy that wanted to be on a national stage. And for whatever reason, maybe it's an ego thing. I made a video about that too.
Yeah. Hey, I'm sure you're type A personality. I'm type A personality. And it kind of goes along with it, right?
Yeah, it does. It does. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I ran my first half marathon in November of that year. That 5K was in July. I ran my first half marathon in November, and then started training for a marathon. And I got injured. and I went through several injury seasons before I could actually run a full marathon. My first full marathon was in Chicago in 2015, and it was injury city up until that point.
Yeah.
But by that point, I'd already gotten the bug, and my goal at that point was to qualify for Boston, come hell or high water. And so over the next year or year and a half, I trained rigorously.
Yeah.
And like you say, a type A personality, it was a daily thing. Running with the Dallas Running Club, doing some running on my own, and finally I went to the Last Chance Boston qualifier in Grand Rapids, Michigan, in September of 2016, and qualified the day before the cutoff for Boston.
So what is
Literally
it?
24
When you
hours.
run a qualifier, what do you have to have a certain time to finish that race to get into Boston, or how
Yeah,
does that work if somebody's never done that before?
it depends on your age bracket, your age
Okay.
group. At that point, I was in the 50 to 54-year-old age group, and I qualified with like a 3:24, which I thought
Okay.
was pretty good for me.
Yeah.
And I was 7 or 8 minutes ahead of my cutoff, which I think at that time it was like a 3:35 or something,
Yeah.
3:30, 3:35. But I ran that first Boston, and just decided. And what kind of got me there was watching or seeing all the people at Boston walking around with all their Boston jackets on about how many times they had ran it.
Yeah.
Because the thing there is when you get your Boston jacket, to have the year embroidered on the jacket for every year you ran it. Some people
Oh,
had
nice.
10, 15 years that they had
Wow.
ran it. And I'm thinking, this would be good if I could just stay with this,
Hmm.
long enough. It might actually make me healthy in my older years. And
Yeah.
of course, I'm 59 now. I'll be 60 in November. But
Well, you look good for your age. I wouldn't have guessed that. I figured you were about the same age.
now I'm 59. But
Okay.
what happened? I was just plagued by injuries. Even going into that first Boston, I was injured. I had IT band issues,
Mm.
and didn't run the time I wanted to, but I finished. But I was plagued with injuries, and I started going online, researching, and found that a lot of the top marathoners that are age groupers are actually triathletes.
Yeah.
That's the secret. And so I'm thinking, okay, I got to start riding a bike. So I went and bought a bike.
Yeah.
And did my first triathlon, a little sprint triathlon, in the summer of 2017. And that's where it all started.
Okay.
You start hanging around people that have your goals, and,
Hmm.
they're doing what you're doing. You're going to become like them. They always say that, you're sort of the average of the five people you hang around.
Yeah.
And, up until that point, I wasn't hanging around too many athletes, but I started, on a regular basis hanging around. So
Hmm.
I actually started training at Lifetime Fitness in Garland, Texas.
Okay.
And a lot of those guys were way above where I was. I
Yeah.
mean, they weren't just marathoners; they were ultra marathoners. They were
Oh, wow.
multi-year Ironmen, and that was my inspiration to really, do what I wanted to do to sort of
Yeah.
make, ensure that I was healthy going into my older years,
Hmm.
and also be as competitive as possible. Because let's face it, working every day, it gets boring.
Yeah, it does.
It just, and especially when your kids are grown and gone. I mean, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
You're going to sit around and watch TV every day at night, and all day on the weekends, and watch football and drink
Right.
beer. That was really sort of my downfall, was just being lethargic, sedentary,
Hmm.
probably drinking too much beer.
Yeah.
And now I haven't drank. I quit drinking when I started running. I haven't drank a beer in 8 years.
Oh, wow.
I haven't drank anything. I started eating healthy, and I lost all the weight. I'm
Mhm.
gaining muscle now, which is hard as you get older.
Yeah.
You really got to work on your diet, and your protein intake is crucial.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean that's kind of my story, and now
So,
go ahead.
yeah, I was just gonna say, so if somebody was so what is a Ironman event? So what does that consist of? What do you have to do for that event? If
Well,
anybody doesn't know what that is.
the Ironman event is actually it's they call it multi-sport because it's swimming, cycling, and running.
Okay.
So, let's say, a sprint Ironman, or not Ironman, a sprint triathlon is basically around a 12-mile bike ride It's a 300-meter swim in a pool, usually,
Yeah.
and usually a 5K race. Takes you an hour, 15 minutes,
Okay.
hour, 30 minutes to do it. And for a lot of people, that's a big step, just
Yeah.
doing a sprint triathlon. Well, from if you double that distance, you go to basically what's called an Olympic distance triathlon. And so
Okay.
you're doing, 1,000-meter swim, 800, 1,000 meters, sometimes more, sometimes 1,500-meter swim, up to about a 26-mile bike ride or bike race. For me, back in those days, it was bike ride.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you're doing 10K, and
Okay.
a 10K run, and that's about a 2.5 hour, event for a lot of people.
Yeah.
2 hours, 2.5 hours, 45 minutes. That's a big step, just going to the Olympic distance triathlon.
Yeah.
Well, from there you can go to the half distance, which is called 70.3 in Ironman genre.
Okay.
70.3 because it's 70.3 total miles.
Okay.
And so that generally is a 1.2 mile swim, usually in open water,
Yeah.
which changes everything.
Yeah.
A lake or a river, and it's completely different than pool swimming.
Yeah.
And then it gets into a 56-mile bike race, which generally is a race.
Yeah.
And then it gets into a half marathon distance run.
Wow.
And the average distance for most people is about 6 hours, 6.5 hours. The pros do it in 4. I've done it in 5.5, which is
Wow.
about my average.
Yeah.
But,
Impressive.
the half iron distance, the 70.3, is where I was stuck for a couple of years until I finally did my first full Ironman last year at Ironman Tulsa.
Okay.
A full distance is twice a half Ironman.
Oh, wow.
So it's a 2.4 open water swim,
Whew.
which is daunting, believe me.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if it's in seawater, because you got waves, you got all that kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
We did it in the lake in Tulsa, which was bad enough,
Right.
especially when you're swimming into the current for 2 miles.
Yeah.
But then it's a 112-mile bike race, and then
Whew.
it's a full distance marathon, 26.2 miles. It's a total of 140.6
Wow.
miles. That's a full Ironman, and if you can do that, you're in pretty good shape.
Yeah.
Even just to finish that race, the average finish time for most people is around 13 to 14 hours. The pros do it in 8,
Wow.
which is, it blows me away every time I see a pro go under 8 hours of the full distance.
Yeah,
And
that's impressive.
I'm usually just finishing my bike.
Yeah.
When they're finishing, they're full. They're
Wow.
crossing the finish line.
Yeah.
But the full distance is that's the king. And of course, from there you go on to the ultra marathons, things like that, if you really want to get into that.
The ultra marathon, that's what, 100 miles? Or is that 150 miles?
Well, that's a 100-mile distance race. The ultra marathon technically is a 30-mile marathon, but then you get into the 50-milers, the 100K, which is 60 miles.
Yeah.
100-mile, 250-mile. It just depends on how far you want to race. There's all kinds of events around the world that will really challenge you to your fullest potential.
Oh, yeah. Well, I know my brother did a 50K 2 years ago. He ran a 50K.
Yeah.
They're in Missouri. That's where he's from. That's where they live. So that's it. And he's gone down and did the Goofy Challenge down at Disneyland. Have you heard of those?
Oh,
Where
yeah.
you do the
Oh, yeah.
5K, the 10K, then the half marathon, then the full marathon.
Yeah.
They did all that. So they just started out with the 5K, then they kind of worked their way. And then I think 2 years ago they did all of it.
Yeah.
So that was kind of neat. One thing I wanted to say is when you're doing your training and you had all those injuries. Now, I run the Army 10 miler. We talked about that earlier. This will be my 7th event. And I kind of do that event every year because that kind of keeps me running. That's my motivating factor to keep running. I have some injuries, so I'm limited on what I can and can't do. And I'm hoping to get better enough to move on to that next level. Maybe you start doing a half or a full marathon. But, when you have all those injuries and it keeps you from working out, it's hard to stay mentally focused and not get bogged down with it. If you go out and you run and, one day you may be having hip issues and then you get healed from that. And then you have a knee issue or something else happens. What does Ron do to keep himself motivated and kind of just to understand that this is just a stepping stone and I am going to get better and I'll be able to go on and do better things. Because that can be very, upsetting for a lot of people, and could be the thing that just kind of ends their training altogether.
The biggest thing that, or the most important aspect of this entire journey, really, that I had to learn, you're not just a runner. You're not just a swimmer. You're not just a cyclist. You're an athlete.
Okay. You ready?
Yeah, do a little warm up there.
Okay. You want to do an intro? You're cheating hard.